Listen to this, dear friends. Every minute in the life of our world, every minute we spend $2 million in military budgets around the world. $2 million a minute is spent on military budgets. Medical research for all manner of diseases, which has made a great deal of progress, and which is a blessing for the promise of a longer life. This research only enjoys a fifth of the military budget. This process, which we cannot emerge from, means that there will be hatred and fanaticism, sources of new wars, and this would also lead to a waste. I know that it's very easy poetically to criticize ourselves at the national level, and I think it would be somewhat disingenuous in this world to say that there are resources that could be saved and that could be spent on other useful things that would be possible, once again, if we were capable of establishing global agreements and prevention, as well as planetary policies which would guarantee peace and which would give the weakest guarantees that we don't have. We would have to cut back enormous resources. But we can ask ourselves a question with this humankind today. What direction would we be headed in without these global agreements? And that's where we are today, because we cannot reason as a species, let alone individuals. Global institutions especially today are powerless and lie in the shadow of great nations. Obviously, these want to retain their power. They block the United Nations in its action, which was created with a hope and as a dream for peace, for humankind. But what is even worse, they uproot it from planetary democracy. Because we're not all equal. We cannot all be equal in this world where there are those who are stronger and those who are weaker. As a result, it's a wounded planetary democracy, and it prevents a global agreement for peace. And hence, we let us treat those diseases where they appear. And the major powers treat them how they wish. And we see this from afar. Dear friends, I think it's very difficult to invent a force which is worse than the chauvinistic nationalism of the superpowers. A force which is liberating for the weakest and which is behind this nationalism, liberating for the weakest. It becomes an oppressive instrument in the hands of those who are strong. And we have seen many examples of this in the last 2 centuries. The United Nations, our United Nations, is languishing and is becoming more and more bureaucratic due to a lack of power and autonomy. And there's no recognition of this democracy for the weakest, who are the majority on this planet. By way of example, a very small example, our small country which in absolute terms contributes the largest number of soldiers to peace missions in Latin America. And we go where they ask us to go. But we are small. We are weak. And where resources are distributed and where decisions are taken, we can't even serve coffee. In our deepest heart of hearts, there is an enormous desire to help man emerge from this prehistory. And people who live with war are still in prehistory, despite the many artifacts that he could build. As long as man doesn't leave this prehistory and doesn't do away with war when politics fails, this is the long march and challenge that we have ahead of us. And we say this in full awareness. We know, we are familiar with the solitude of war. However, these dreams mean, these challenges that are on the horizon mean that we have to fight for an agenda of global agreements that would begin to govern our history. And we must overcome, step by step, the threats to life. Our species as such must have a government for all of humankind, which would overcome individualism and which would create political leaders that would take the path to science and not simply that of their immediate interests of those who are governing and suffocating us. At the same time, we have to understand that the poor of the world are not from Africa or Latin America. They're part of humankind, all of them. And as such, this means that we must assist them so that they could lead decent lives. The necessary resources exist. We find it in this predatory waste of our civilization. A few days ago, they said in California, an agency, there was a light in honor of the firemen that was lit for 100 years. It has been lit for 100 years. Friends, how many millions of dollars have they taken from our pockets, creating this junk so that people buy and buy? But this globalization for our planet and for our life means a brutal cultural change. That's what history requires from us. The material basis has changed, and it has changed man with our culture. With this culture, it's as if nothing has happened. And instead of globalization governing us, we govern it. About 20 years ago, we discussed the very humble Tobin tax, which could not be applied at a global level. All of the banks, all of the financial institutions rose up against it. Their private property was harmed and other things as well. However, this is the paradox. With talent and with collective work, with science, men and women, step by step, can make deserts green again. Men and women can take agriculture to the seas. We can develop our agriculture with salt water. The power of humankind is concentrated on what is essential, and that is immeasurable. And there we see the great sources of energy, which we know from photosynthesis. What do we know about photosynthesis? There's a great deal of energy in the world if we work together to use it properly. It's possible to eliminate poverty from the planet. It's possible to create stability. It will be possible for future generations. If they begin to reason as a species and not just as individuals, it would be possible to take life to the galaxies and continue with this dream of conquest that we have in us, in our DNA. But for these dreams to come true, we will have to govern ourselves as a species, or we will die. We will succumb because we're not capable of maintaining the civilization which we have developed. This is our dilemma. We shouldn't spend our time remedying consequences. Let us think about the deep-rooted causes. Let's think about the civilization of waste. What it's doing is taking away time from human life, dealing with pointless matters. Let us remember that human life is a miracle. We are alive as a result of a miracle, and nothing is more important than life. And our duty, our biological duty, is above everything else. And we must respect life, promote it, take care of it, to reproduce it, and understand that We are the species. Thank you very much.